And now for the fun tonight, I'm going to introduce to you our presenter, who is Tim O'Neill. He's a hardworking young man, got 2 or 3 jobs, I think 3. Hard to imagine that anymore, but 3 jobs, and he writes a lot of short stories. Not only does he write them, he gets them published, which is a new dimension for us to consider. And so I can hardly wait to hear what he's got to share with us. And so without anything further, Tim O'Neill from Boulder, Colorado. Let's give him a warm round.
Thank you. Thank you, Dwight. Thank you, Mike, for inviting me. It's good to see everybody here. Yeah, it's good to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint and share my screen because that's why you're all here. Hold on a second. I have too many tabs open as the story usually goes. Here we go. There's the green button. And here we go. And perfect. So I am going to be talking about how to, hold on a second. I just have to move a couple things around. Let me slideshow. There we go. Now you should be able to see the whole bit. All right, perfect. So we're talking just about submitting stories, where to submit, etc. So Dwight, let's see. There we go. So Dwight started the introduction. So I grew up in the high desert. I went to Sultana, class of 2010. After that, I went on to earn my bachelor's from Berkeley, master's from San Diego State in nutrition and exercise physiology. And I work as a registered dietitian, exercise physiologist, group fitness instructor, and health coach for the city of Boulder. I've sold 10.5 stories, and I'll explain the half bit in a little bit. My little disclaimer here is that I am a horror writer, so all of the publications or places that I suggest, or a lot of them, are in the horror, science fiction, and fantasy genres. And right, let's get started. So these are my stories. My first story was sold in 2018 when I was starting my master's in San Diego. The titles kind of scattered over the past 4 years or so, with the 10.5 stories you can see at the top are 10A and 10B. So my story Bug Bites is currently under, it's in a writing contest through Crystal Lake Publishing, where people who are patrons of on the Patreon site can vote on the different stories. So they've essentially published it for the first time, but it's still in progress. And then my most recent story is Fires in Garbage Head, which is a horror story, which will be coming out in February. So those are my titles. So my first advice to you is when you're writing a story and you're getting it ready for submission, the first thing that the publication sees is the title. So if they see a title that says the most boring story in the world, they probably won't read it, or my encyclopedic knowledge of baseball facts. But so you want to keep your title short, make it interesting, make it catchy, and the title should serve as a brief intro to the complexity of the story as a whole. I've seen a couple different publications that gave the tip of saying avoiding titles like the blank of blank, so like the magic ring of fictitious country, or the something of something else. They see those too often, and it doesn't say very much about what your story's about. So it's important to grab your reader. And so the best titles, the ones that we remember and that stick in your readers' minds, are usually metaphors and are colorful enough and also share that complexity of the story. So I gave you some examples here from classic literature: The Grapes of Wrath, Catcher in the Rye, The Color Purple. Of course, they're written about other things, but it's the title that we remember and we say, oh yeah, that was that story about fill in the blank. And so that's what really makes it interesting. So first things first, anytime you're submitting a story, you should know the publication. So when I was a newer writer, I would send stories out to places and I had no idea about the background of the publication, the editor, etc. And a lot of them just got rejected flat off right out. So it's important to know the publication. If you can, know the editor, know what he, she, or they like to read or what they like to write. I found it helpful as well to research them and find out, or like try to adjust your main character to match that editor specifically. So if you know that this person is a certain race, certain gender, sometimes it does help to have your main character in your story look a lot like the editor. So the more you know about the publication can definitely help your chances as well. With knowing the publication, read a copy if you can get a hold of it. Read it, read the stories, the types of stories that they like to publish. I know the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction offers a promotional deal where you can buy 1 copy or so, and so you don't have to subscribe for the whole year, but you can see what they like to publish, their poems, their stories, etc. Also know what genre they are. So if you're trying to submit a Western to something like the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, it's not going to go over well. If you're trying to submit horror to a fantasy publication or something that only publishes fairy tales, it's not going to go over well. So definitely know what they're looking for, understand if your story fits, and before you send it off, spell check, spell check, spell check. Or as Anita likes to say, dang, you spell heck. So make sure that that's on, you've checked it, you've had somebody else read it, you've looked through it a few times to make sure that it's in its best shape. So with that, it's important to look at the guidelines of the publication. So if the publication says that they want stories between 5,000 to 7,500 words, this does not mean 4,800, it does not mean 2,500, it does not mean submit the best novella you've ever written of 30,000 words, because that is a fast way to get yourself rejected. So understand the word count first. That is often the first thing that editors will look at in your query letter when you say, dear editor, this is my story, this is the genre, this is the word count. That should be in the first line of your query letter before you even go into your publication history, your background, etc. So query letter, you're talking about your word count, the genre, and how you're sending it in. And then also going into formatting, again, read the guidelines. Every publication will have very specific things they're looking for. And if they deviate from the normal formatting guidelines, they'll let you know. Typically, these things are things like single versus double spaced, the type of font. Some only want to look at certain kinds of fonts, whether it's serif or sans serif, because of how it looks on the screen, how it looks on their eyes, etc. Different publications, whether it's print or electronic, will vary their formatting guidelines, and it's important to pay attention to that. Typically, William Shun formatting is the gold standard. There is a website, which is on my next slide, that goes over, it's a whole 3 or 4 page document written as if it was for publication of how to format, how to space, etc. So that's typical. Another thing editors look for is how your document is submitted. They will usually say whether they want it as a .doc file, .dox, RTF, PDF, etc. If you happen to also be an artist, they have very specific guidelines for the pixels and size of the art that they look for as well. And then also whether they want you to send in the document attached to your email, inserted into your email, just copy and pasted, or whether they would like your submission uploaded through the submission form. Also, all things to know. And of course, you can always query if you're in doubt and you are wondering if it's above the word count or if it's slightly outside of the genre or if it doesn't fit, you can always reach out to the editor on that too. So this is the website. Oh, okay. This is the website for the William Shun formatting. I'm going to try and share this. I'm screen sharing. Mike and I practiced this earlier, but I want to make sure that you should be able to see my screen. Okay, I'm going to keep going unless somebody stops me, but I'm looking at a website of proper manuscript formatting for William Shun.
We can see it, Tim.
Thank you, Mike. Perfect. So this is what it looks like. And if you just type this in, you will be able to find this. And I really enjoy this because, like I said, it's written in the way that it should be formatted, but the whole story that he describes is how it should be edited. So with tabs, with fresh white page, etc., size font, Times New Roman, etc. And there's 5 pages of this. I'm not going to go through all of this. I'll let you do that. That can be your homework. But this is the gold standard for formatting, and I encourage you to follow it. Let me go to here. And oops, here we go. Share. Here we go. And somehow I goofed up, but we are going to get back on to here. Okay. So that's William Shun. Next up, I'm back on my PowerPoint. This is my picture of my actual rejection file. As you can see, there are 259 items in there. So I just want everyone to know, when you are sending out stories, it is inevitable. You will get rejected. Own it, accept it as being part of a writer. Just know that when you receive a form letter, it's not personal, but if you do get a note in the letter that says something the editor liked, something that they would have changed, those are golden. So definitely keep an eye out for that. I showed Mike a rejection letter that I just received earlier this week for a story that I had written, and I liked it because it had a warmer tone than some of the other rejections. So anytime you can find something like that, enjoy it. The quote is from Babe Ruth: "Don't let the fear of striking out keep you from playing the game." I encourage you to keep trying, keep submitting stories too. So where do we start? So the best way that I found to submit stories is to submit to the smaller publications first. Build up a name for yourself. When I was a newer writer, I sent a lot of stories out to the big name magazines because I thought, oh, I'm going to have a pro sale in weeks. It's going to be great. And so I submitted to, say, the Magazine of FNSF, Clarkesworld, etc. And that my hubris earned me a lot of rejections. And so I started submitting to smaller publications, and a lot of them only pay token pay rates. So like $10, $25 and a copy, up to $50. And I think, in my opinion, that is a completely fine way to at least get your name out there, to build a brand, to build up your resume, so that when you do write future query letters, you can say, I've sold these to these smaller publications. This is where my stories are. This is my Amazon author page. This is what I've done so far. And I stole this quote from Stephen King, but it's the more you publish, the easier it gets. So people are more likely to take a risk on your writing, more likely to publish you if you can say you have even these handful of smaller publications first. And I wrote it in all caps because it's important. Just never pay for submissions. If anyone's asking for money or submission fee, it's usually a scam. You usually either won't hear from them again after you give them money, or they'll keep asking you for more money and say, oh yes, we published your story, but we need another $50 and another $10 for whatever it is that they invent. So just as a rule of thumb, never pay for submissions. I do know there are some writing contests that do require whatever the submission fee is so that they can fund the award, but typically the rule is never pay for submissions. All right, so where do we look? So I have a couple of websites here. I won't go through all of these. I think I'll try again to share my screen on the next one. The Horror Tree updates every day, and you can select what kind of publication you're looking for, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, anthology, magazine, etc. A lot of my recent stories were found homes on publications on Horror Tree, so I encourage you to take a look there. Submission Grinder is great for a couple different reasons. One, it tells you let's see, I'm actually going to click on this and I'm going to try to share of the submit. Here we go. Of the Submission Grinder. So right now my screen is on the Submission Grinder website, what it looks like, etc. And so you can search by let's do the advanced search just to show you what you're looking for, whether it's the genre, the word count, the type of submission, and the submission grinder will return to you all of the publications that have open calls right now. And that's very helpful. So that's the main reason I like them. The second reason is that you can track your statistics. So if you send in a story to the magazine of zoology, fictional zoology, you can see what the percentage of rejections are, percentage of acceptances, and how long it takes that publication to reply on average. And you can see whether your submission has been there longer, if it's gotten rejected right off the bat, etc. So this is a really useful tool to use. You can form an account, it's free, and you can log and track your own submissions to add to the statistics. Okay, moving right along. Resume share. There we go. All right. All right, so I'm moving on in my PowerPoint. Next slide. Another website is Authors Publish. This is a free resource. They post.
Tim,
What
I'm
was that?
sorry, we're still seeing the grinder.
Okay. Let's do this. New share. And here we go. All right. It worked on the practice, but not while we were actually doing this. Here we go. And there we go. Authors Publish. That's the last one I'm going to do. Authors Publish is just another resource, which you should be seeing now. It's a free resource. They publish weekly calls with open calls for submissions. They include themed calls, magazines, anthologies, etc. It's also a free resource. I encourage you to look that up. I've never actually used this or sent stories to publication through Authors Publish, but it is out there. Another resource that I like to use and that I find very helpful in getting stories out there are these Facebook groups. So Facebook groups, there are all flavors of groups for any genre, types of writing, poetry, etc. I gave you some examples of different markets that I am enrolled in. So I'm in the open call for horror markets, the open submission calls for short story writers, and I also follow the Horror Writers Association. The HWA is going through and publishing their Stoker Awards conventions, which are going on now, which is really exciting because you have the option, if you're an HWA member, to read the submissions that have been nominated for Stokers or different awards, and you can see what they're looking for future publications, future award ceremonies. So I encourage you, if you are on Facebook, to look up, just type in the search bar, different writers group, different genre writing groups, and they will return publications that have open calls going on. So this was just a list that I compiled. There are more of pro-rate publications for horror, science fiction, and fantasy. I have rejection letters from all of these places for different stories that I've sent in. But they are Clarkesworld, Magazine of FNSF, Lightspeed, The Dark, Nightmare, Solar Punk Magazine. The list goes on and on. Some of these are in different countries, and that is also fine if you can send in stories there. So just to give you an example, Albedo 1 is an Irish SNFF, F and SF magazine. Andromeda Spaceways is in Australia. Black Static and Interzone are both in the UK. So you are not limited to just sending in to American publications. The world is your oyster. So then the question is, I've sold something, I got this acceptance letter, but are they legit or is it a scam? And to answer that question, I'd like to point you to the SFWA, the Science Fiction Writers of America's resource, Writer Beware. So the Writer Beware is available to people and non-members. It is a list compiled of agents, publishers, and different places to send in stories. And you can see whether if you have an acceptance letter, you can just double check whether it's made their list of thumbs down or not quite reputable publications that are out there. So SFWA, Writer Beware, I recommend it. I've looked up a couple and I've dodged a couple different calls for submissions from places that were just scam anthologies or scam poetry collections, etc. So take a look. So just a conclusion to wrap up everything that I've said, the better you can know the publication, know the editor, know what they publish, what kinds of stories, the better understand their submission guidelines and follow those rules, the better your chances of actually having your story read and then also getting accepted. Avoid submission fees as much as possible. Using the internet, using the many resources that are at our disposal, sorry, on the internet with writing groups, open calls on Facebook, authors publish different resources. Understand you're going to get rejected, but just keep trying, and eventually your stories will find a home if you are persistent. And now I'm going to stop sharing so that I'm just leaving it for discussion of where do you submit? What is your preferred method of submitting stories? What's worked for you? Do you have suggestions for the group? I'm going to leave this for an open discussion and stop sharing. So that was pretty much it for me. If anyone has any ideas and wants to shout out, I'm gonna be quiet for a little bit.
Tim, I'd like to ask a question. When you were talking about the titles of short stories, and you used as an example the color purple as a good title. However, it's so ambiguous, I wouldn't know what it was referring to, except for being familiar with the movie. But if the movie hadn't come along yet, it might as well be the color green, and I don't know if it's about grass or what, So could you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. I would say because it's so ambiguous, that's part of its charm, and that's part of what draws you in. You think, oh, the color purple, that's unusual. I want to check it out and learn more about that.
Okay.
That'd be my answer.
All right. Thank you.
You have to unmute yourself, Mary.
Can you hear me now?
We can
There we
hear
go.
you.
Excellent. Have you ever submitted your stories for having them made into a movie or anything like that? Have you ever tried?
I have not. I have no idea how that would work. If you have any
Well-
suggestions, I'm all ears.
I have a suggestion. I have a friend named Colleen Tidd, Tidd. She lives in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and she has sold several of her horror stories and short stories, and they're making a movie of one right now, and she's got the contacts. So if you want to talk with her and just pick her brain, we're friends on Facebook. I will tell her that I met you and that you're writing these stories, and I'm sure that she would have some info for you, and you'd have some for her. It's always neat to network.
Absolutely. Networking is very important, especially when it comes to writing. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mhm.
What's her name again, Mary?
Colleen Tidd, Tidd.
Because Tim can always search her on Facebook and
Yes,
and,
yes.
and instant message her.
And in the meantime, I'll probably be talking to her in the morning, and I will tell her that the California Writers Club had you as a guest, and I want to put y'all in contact. So then I'll tell her your name, and she can search you on Facebook. Is that okay?
Perfect. Sounds good to me.
All right.
He's actually one of our members, Mary Ruth.
Oh,
I am.
excellent. Good.
Yes, I lived in
Well-
California for many years.
Well, Roberta Smith and I wrote a screenplay, and we're trying to market it. And Colleen had some contacts for us, so we're kind of working with her about that. And our story is called Bereaved. So we'll see what happens.
And we wish you the best.
Thank
Best of
you.
luck.
Judith, you had a question? Unmute yourself, Judith.
Have a quick statement and then a question, if I may. I'm acquainted slightly online with a very interesting young gentleman in Austin, Texas, named Gabriel Gleis. And he's a horror writer. He's been writing for a long time. He edits magazines, he teaches, but his most recent book is not even published yet. It's already been sold to Sony to be a movie. It's called The Devil Takes You Home. So he's interesting to follow on Twitter particularly. And he's someone who I think is a real up and comer. Very interesting stuff, not totally the kind of stuff that I love to read. This horror is pretty horrific, but he's just brilliant. And yeah, The Devil Takes You Home. Look for the book, look for the movie from Sony. I have a different question for people who want to read things that are not genre, not fiction at all, not horror, fantasy, whatever, and maybe more in the traditional, almost what might be called a sentimental vein. I have a story that I think is just amazing. That was written by my late husband, actually. And I would desperately love to get it published. I think it's really the single best thing he ever wrote. And especially after I edited a little bit, which he never would have let me do if he could stop me. But I just think it's splendid, but not everybody likes that kind of story. And there's hundreds of literary journals. How would you parse through to find someone who appreciates kind of an old-fashioned story told in an old-fashioned way and kind of a real poignant, heartwarming kind of story?
I just happened to think of something that Tim might be interested in, that in March, they're going to be filming in Maine a story of Stephen King and how he got started writing and everything. It'll be a TV show. And my son is booked to go there because he was Gage in Pet Sematary in the movie, and he's now 35. So they're going to have him in a cameo role or something there. So he's already booked that.
That sounds great. Did you want to field Judith's question, Tim?
Sure, Judith, I think my recommendation would be either just Googling that, so open calls for literary journal submissions, or the submission grinder also would be a good resource too, to look through if you're looking for literary fiction submissions too. I know that they have an option for that too.
Anita, go ahead.
Yeah, also Guideposts and the Chicken Soup series will take shorter stuff that's like that. Of course, it depends on the length, like anything does. And one thing I would very much encourage people to do.
Yeah, Anita, I'm concerned about that because this is it's not a personal account, it's a true story.
So it's fictionalized, but still the warm fuzzies, huh? Yeah. Something I would encourage all of us to do, and Tim mentioned this, but yeah, I definitely want to emphasize it. When you're looking at whether it's a publication or a contest, or I happen to be familiar with our Lit Review, as well as I know the Poemsmiths have worked on an anthology. The people that are setting the thing up, the editors, the organizational people, they work really hard to put things together to make it easier for the writers. And the frequently asked questions are there for a reason. And the guidelines are there for a reason. And the requirements are there for a reason, as are the opportunities to read some of the articles or read past submissions online. And it really saves a lot of work for the editors because, yeah, if you send something that belongs, that a warm fuzzy story about your grandma hanging up clothes in the 30s to a horror anthology, that's a waste of their time. They might get some good laughs out of it, but not the way you perhaps wanted to intend it to be. But anyway, one thing to just make people feel really good about you as a writer is to totally do what the guidelines, the frequently asked questions, what the standards for submission, all of that stuff, what that is, then even if you don't make it, people aren't going to say, oh, her again, the next time you submit something. Yeah, and thanks for the thumbs up, Tim. But yeah, do read that stuff. Don't just send it out and hope like mud, some of it'll stick to the wall.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Tim, I know you commented in capital letters, never pay for submissions, but there have to be some exceptions to that. For our club, of course, it's a money-making thing, but you did kind of sort of a sub-comment say, but sometimes it does pay for the prizes, and that's where we stand. We do always charge for our submissions, but it gets back to the judges and to the winners in cash prizes. So it isn't, we try to at least break even, if not make a little bit of money. But a comment on Anita about following the guidelines. I have decided, I edit all of the anthologies for the club. I'm going to be a little bit more hardcore next year. I'm getting real tired of putting together the guidelines and saying, people, here they are, sending it to everybody, pay attention. And then I spend my time rewriting them because they didn't pay attention. So I think there may be some rejections next year when we do our next anthology, or at least say, up, you can resubmit it, but fix it first, because it's very, very time consuming from an editor standpoint, and those who are involved in putting an anthology together to people think, they can figure it out. They know what I mean. But when you've got, 60 or 80 or 100, and some magazines I'm sure have more than that, it's very time consuming from an editor's part to fix that kind of stuff. So yeah, please follow the submissions.
Cinta, go ahead.
Thank you. Tim, thank you for this information. I'm wondering how much of it crosses over to other genres. There were so many great examples in horror, and it won't help me a bit, but I'm going to experiment. I'm familiar with a couple of them, and I don't really know how to use Facebook in that way, but I'll try. I wanted to say that recently, in the last few months, I gave an entire talk to my branch, which is the Inland Empire CWC. My topic was the devil's in the details, and it was all about following the guidelines. And while I'm not the world's most perfect speaker, as Mike now knows, I got those points across. But people shine you on about it. They just they don't seem to want to know that. It's like, oh yeah. And that's just what happens. I am a bit shy about submitting, to answer your question about where. I've only gotten the courage really for my local club, my local branch, or the CWC, unless it was professional. I got lucky in my early career with some professional articles. I keep doing the huh, Mike? I know, I hear it now. The one big one that I did get the courage to send was to Chicken Soup for the Soul. And it was the most delightfully warm rejection letter ever. I saved it. I saved the letter. It didn't bother me at all. I was like, yeah, they read it. They saw it, Thank you, Tim.
Nice. Absolutely. Getting those warm, fuzzy rejection letters, they're really the best.
Tim, we've got a couple of minutes. Would you be willing to share your screen again and show us how to go to Facebook and get on these groups?
Sure.
Yes.
Absolutely. Let me.
I know I'd find that helpful. And then afterwards, Laura Lee, you can jump in with your question.
Okay. I am doing my best. Hold on.
Yeah, you're doing fine.
All right. You should be looking at the Grindr right now.
Yes.
Perfect. No, that's a good thing to share and to know. First post on my feed is from Anita. Who knew? So over here on the Facebook side, and then you can see once you do follow one of these places, it'll pop up on your shortcut, so it's always on the side of your feed. And if you like Calvin and Hobbes, I recommend the Everything Calvin and Hobbes bar, because then your whole newsfeed will be Calvin and Hobbes. And so I would just type in like writer groups or fiction, etc. So when they pop up, the different groups will pop up and you can have the option to join them. So I can show you, let's see, let's do short story submission groups, short story submissions, or open, let's do open calls for story submissions, open call for story submissions. And so there are many, many different ones that are available. So these are the ones that I am members of. So open submission calls for short story writers, that's more of a literary fiction bent. Obviously the horror submissions, horror, paranormal, etc. That if you keep going, there's the science fiction. What else do we have? These are all the ones that I've been. Anyway, this is how you would do that. And then usually these groups will have 1 to 2 questions to answer. They'll ask you something simple like, what is your favorite publication in this genre to submit to, just so they know that you've actually read some of them and you kind of know the genre and you know what you're looking for. Or they'll say something like, what is your favorite fantastic creature? And they're not to scare you away, they're just to weed out people who aren't really writers nor just kind of trolling or fishing through the groups, but they are fairly easy to get into the groups. But that is how I would recommend it. So again, Facebook, in your search bar, just typing in open calls, genre fiction, writers groups, anything you're looking for, and you'll find that in the Facebook area. There we go. Hope that answered your question and was a good example.
Very much so. Laura Lee, if you could lower your camera down just a little bit. You've got those mysterious eyes. Those mysterious eyes. Go ahead.
Okay, Jenny kind of mentioned this, but you had it all capitalized, never pay for submissions. Well, she mentioned like our anthology, although we put the money back in prizes, but like our literary review, there's a submission fee. A lot of places have the submission fee, and yet you say never pay for submissions. I'm just really kind of surprised by that. I just wonder if you'd elaborate that on a little bit. I mean, even our own literary review has a $10 submission fee.
Sure. I'd love to elaborate on that. When I
You
was
wouldn't submit to our literary review? Oh, please, Tim.
When I was a newer writer, I was very optimistic about my stories, and I bumped into actually quite a few scams, and they all asked for money. And I remember I was in high school at the time, and I asked an English teacher, like, are any of these actually legit? Like, what are your thoughts? And then she actually gave me that line of like, typically don't pay to have anything published. So of course there are exceptions, there are contests, there are the literary review, etc. But just as a guideline, if you're submitting to something that you found on the internet that isn't related to the High Desert Writers Club or the California Writing Club, I would say it's caveat emptor, essentially. If it's something on the internet, something you don't know, it's any kind of internet scam. If they're asking you for money, just be careful is my advice.
I have another question, Tim. I deal with she's a poet, but she's absolutely paranoid about people stealing her work. And she says that a lot of the poetry submission sites that she goes to, they want her to submit her work anonymously, to not put her name on the submission. And she said, I won't do that because they'll steal it and they'll take it and they'll say it's theirs and it won't be mine. Do you run into that at all? Has there ever been a problem of taking your name off of a submission and then somebody stealing it, you not getting credit for it? Would you do that? How would you handle something like that?
So I would first do research. So I would have her look at the poetry equivalent for SFWA's Writer Beware. I'm certain that they exist. I'm sure Poets, I think it's Poets and Writers magazine has something similar where they can kind of vet out bad publications first. But I would say it's not a problem to submit something anonymously. A couple of my stories that I've had published do that. They call it a blind submission, where they have you take off your address, your name, your byline, all of it, because they want to give everybody a fair chance. So they don't want to be biased. If Stephen King submits something and Tim O'Neill submits something, they want to just give everybody an open chance. I'm guessing that's what they do with this poetry submission as well. But to answer your question, no, I've never run into a problem of anybody stealing my
But
work.
then if it's accepted for publication, your name is on it when it goes to print, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, I thought that was probably the case, but I don't do a lot of submissions, so that's why I asked.
The lit review asks for blind submissions.
Yeah, they do.
That was my
And
point.
nobody's gonna steal your lit review submission.
Well,
It's
and I
just
tried-
so it's,
I tried to tell her, it's people are not going to steal your work. We're writers. We want our own stuff submitted. We don't want to take somebody else's. We want to do our own, but she's just really, really paranoid. So
Jenny, to assuage your fears, I think if it was a scam, they'd be more interested in asking you for money and like getting you to pay them money rather than trying to steal your work.
that's what I figured, but thanks, Tim.
I'd like to add to what Tim was saying real quickly. I've also heard it said not to pay for publication. There's a lot of organizations out there now that they will publish your book, but they charge you $6,000 to publish your book. And they actually will publish your book and they will, print so many copies, but they're not taking any of the liability. And it's a way for them to be able to get your money. Basically, you're the one that has all the risk. For a publisher or for an agent, you should never have to pay for that. If the publisher believes in you and believes in your stories or your book, they will negotiate a contract with you. And there might be an advance, there might not be one, but you shouldn't be paying for your own publisher. Asunta, go ahead. Asunta, you're muted.
Questions for Tim or any of you here regarding those blind submissions. Do you find that do you typically take your name out of the properties in your document to make sure that it doesn't show up on the submission? Because I've kind of run across that where I sent something once and my name was on it. So now I'm a little paranoid about that. And I go into properties and make sure, and there's a way within properties that you can erase any identifying information. Does anybody think about that?
No, I can't say that I have. My question for you though, was that a Google Doc or was that like a Microsoft doc?
Well, I write in Word, the most
Okay.
current Office, and so that's where I'm writing it. And I can't remember when I saw it, because then when I receive, because I judge as well, and when I receive documents, I sometimes have to open them. I have to open them in Google Docs in order to be able to look at them the way I want to see them. And yeah, names have shown up.
I had not considered that. Anita had a quick comment though.
yeah, that sort of thing also depends upon how those people who are screening it have sent things up, as well as your own. I know if I want, I can have a partial name or the entire routing for a file in my footer. And sometimes, I know when I was at work, I would have my name automatically be part of the file name on my documents.
Right.
And for sure, if somebody has automatically set that up, that's not so good. But in terms of if you click on document properties, is that going to show up? Mostly that sort of thing, when readers and judges are looking at screening submissions, usually they don't go that deep. That's just one thing where if it hasn't been set up so that that stuff's not there, or sometimes it'll be filtered through another way when people get it. But yeah, it's a good thing not to have your name in the footer, even if it is in 5-point font. It's still there. but it is a good point.
Thank you.
So I have a question for you, Tim. What is your aspiration in terms of writing?
I mean, I would love to make a living off of it eventually if I could. My strategy ever since I started writing was to build a name for myself using short stories and then working my way up to writing a novel. I recommend the book On Writing by Stephen King. He talks about a similar method where he started writing short stories and then gained more confidence and got better at his craft, and then eventually wrote Carrie, and it sold for a ridiculous amount of money. And I think, to answer your question, Mike, I'm kind of trying to emulate that and do short stories, working up to novellas, and then up to eventually novels too. When I was a newer writer, I tried writing a novel right out, wrote a couple of them, and they were so bad. I felt like I could learn so much more learning in a smaller form. And like a short story, you learn so much about writing it, because it has to be a good story, but it has to be concise, so you know all the rules of writing before progressing on to a novel. So that was my strategy.
Very interesting. Any other comments or questions for Tim? Judith?
This is for everybody, really. Just the simplest way I know of, if I'm considering a literary journal or any magazine or publisher, if it's not someplace I've heard of, I Google it and I look at their website, but not just their website. I go down a few pages. I look to see if there's anything negative said about them. I think usually if something's kind of squirrely, you're going to know about it if you research a little bit. So I would highly recommend doing that. That's all.
That's a good comment. Thank you for sharing.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I think we should thank Tim for his time tonight. It is almost 9 o'clock where he's at, and we thank him for staying up and for doing this for us. And Tim, we wish you the very best in your writing career. Someday we'll all be able to say, we know that guy. We were there when he was just starting out. All right,
Well,
let's
it's
get.
been-
Yeah, this was great, Tim. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a privilege to be here. Thank you. And good luck to everybody. Best of luck all around.
Thank
Good
you.
luck to all of us.
Absolutely.
All right,
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
good night.